Okay, good morning. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jason Price. I'll be moderating our panel where we want to have a discussion about cultivating agency through emerging community-owned solutions. I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves in turn as they come up and introduce the project they're working with, and so we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to start by giving you a sense of what our goals are as a panel. We would want to convince you that cultivating agency and community ownership are really important and get you excited about this approach and invite you to explore it further. Then I'll take just a minute or two to set the stage. Each panelist will take a brief period to introduce just what their project they're working on is about. And then the main part of today's presentation is really more of a conversation. I'll be asking some questions, and panelists will asking, having conversations with each other, addressing a few questions, and then I'll ask for your questions. So as you're listening, if you hear things that make you wonder about how this all might work, please prepare those, and you'll have a chance to ask them at the end. Okay. So what is agency? And this is really just a general overview of thoughts of agency in general. And so in thinking about this, I thought, well, what are some roles that agents play? You can think of a subscription agent, for instance, and I see their major role as connection. They're connecting thousands of libraries with hundreds or thousands of publishers. Or you can think about a real estate agent, right, whose role maybe is to influence and bring together both the buyer and the seller, finding a compromise that can benefit both. A third agent role is maybe a talent or celebrity agent who might sign on behalf of the person they're representing or make it happen. And so what I think each of these have in common is they're about creating and maintaining partnerships with the most effective balance of power. And so really, why agency? And I think the answer to this question comes from an experience I've had a lot, which is in working with a new vendor or a startup that is developing a product, and people ask for particular developments or things, and those folks listen. They listen closely, but then the response is often, "Oh, well, that's not actually what you really want. What you really want is this over here that we already have developed," right? So what we're talking about here in community-owned solutions is still having that same kind of conversation, because any development that you do, you have to make decisions on what to do and what not to do. But it's about changing where the conversation takes place, who has it, and the basis of the decision. So there's just a real general overview, and now I will ask each of the panelists to introduce the project.
Okay, cool. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jill Morris. I'm the Associate Director at PALCI, which is the Pennsylvania Academic Library Consortium. We're made up of about 70 academic institutions, mostly within Pennsylvania, but also have members in New York, New Jersey, and West Virginia. And we serve about 800,000 FTE in total. So today I'm here to talk about CC+, which is a project that we have created within our consortium, but within consortial relationships across the United States and also internationally, which is really exciting. So actually at Charleston in 2014, a group of consortia got together to talk about a problem that we had identified, which is how do we gather usage statistics from our electronic resource licensing, and how do we use it in a way that's productive for our consortia? So this sort of conversation grew into what became a project, and myself and then Ann Osterman from VIVA, the Virginia Academic Library Consortium, and a few others got together. We created a survey, and we sort of did a needs assessment of more than 40 consortia internationally, representing thousands of libraries. And there was this strong desire for a set of tools and possibly even a service that would help us do this activity. We were all spending a lot of a lot of energy working on the same problem at our individual consortia, and there was this realization that we needed to come together. There was also a realization that we didn't want just anybody taking control of this data. We wanted to have that sense of agency, and when I think about agency, I think one of my definitions there is taking responsibility and ownership and driving a process forward that really works for us. And so we as partners came together around this idea to look at what the gap in tools was for what we had available to us, what we sort of wanted to achieve as a community, and to see if we could come together around some shared goals. We ended up writing a grant proposal to IMLS, and we were funded in 2017 to create a prototype platform that was open source for consortia to use, specifically for this purpose. And it was really a group of about 10 consortia that got together and modeled very closely after JISC, what JISC does in the UK to gather counter usage data and pull it all together in a way that you can actually utilize it in a way that's meaningful for our negotiations. Many of us are involved with consortia, and you know how important this data is to any kind of negotiation that you do. So we really wanted to come together, quickly build a prototype, and see if we might be able to then create this into a production-ready service and set of tools that anybody could then either locally host or potentially go out and find service providers who might be able to help us with this activity. So we were successful in receiving a planning grant, $50,000 from IMLS that helped really kickstart the project. The PALSI consortium sort of was the home for the project, but we had lots of others involved all throughout the process. We had JISC from the UK, Couperin from France, and then in addition we had CRKN from Canada, and a host of consortia, including SCELC, PALSI, USMAI, I'm going to leave somebody off, CDL, and a number of others within the United States. So it really was an international effort. After we finished the prototype, and by the way, it is available in GitHub. There's a URL up on the slide, and we'll share the slides out that links to the prototype that we've built so far. After that, we applied for the next round of funding, which would take us through to creating production-ready set of tools. And we've just kicked off that phase of the project. So we're in the 2018 to 2020 grant period, and we were awarded $247,000 to be able to get it where we needed to be. So we're in the process right now of setting our governance structure up in a way that will ensure long-term success. We're looking at what other partnerships we need to make outside of our consortia. What vendors do we need to be talking with? Who else is working on similar projects in this area? We know of a Folio project. We know of folks in the choral community who are working on the same thing. And I've heard from vendors who are working on similar types of projects. So how do we bring those things together in a way that makes sense and will create a community that is sustainable for consortia? And this tool, while it is aimed specifically at consortia, is really meant to benefit libraries. What are consortia without libraries, right? We're individual groups of libraries that are coming together, and then we may want to benchmark with each other, with other consortia as well. So we're putting those partnerships in place and we want to create a set of tools that a consortium could use, but also that any library could implement if you wanted. So we're building it in a multi-tenant sort of way that will allow for that to happen. We're very concerned about sustainability of the project, so getting those processes in place. And then next up, we're going to be advertising some. I know, I hear that alarm. Jason's like, all right, cut it off. We're going to be advertising 2 positions. One is a project coordinator role for this project, and then the other is a UX developer. So just be aware that we're going to be putting those out there if there's anybody who's interested. Little
No,
advertisement.
I'm just trying not to trip over myself.
Yeah, don't trip. We've got a small real estate up here. Okay. All right, come on up, Kirsten.
You ready?
Yep, that's it.
Oh, thank you. Hi, I'm Kirsten Leonard. I'm the Executive Director of PALNI, which is the Private Academic Libraries of Indiana. If you've not heard of us, we're private colleges and seminaries. We're now at 24, and we have about 43,000 FTE, so quite a bit smaller than what PALC has in play. We've been together since 1992 and largely around systems until 2010 when they embarked on a trajectory towards deep collaboration. So at this stage, you know, we're all aware of the challenges, I think, in the Midwest for private colleges anywhere, I believe, and really, frankly, any college anywhere, shrinking funding, shrinking pool of students. And so we're working together quite deliberately in deep collaboration, meaning we're sharing staff, we're sharing collections, we're sharing skill sets, we're sharing partnerships, external partnerships. So that whole goal of working together to contain costs, but also to deal with the increased need for deep skill sets. You know, how do we attract deep skill sets to these private colleges and work together and actually meet the needs for our institutions at scale? So our collaboration, obviously, with each other is one thing, but our key goal is, as well, is to collaborate with other partners. So Powney has been in search of an institutional repository that we felt was effective yet cost affordable since 2012. So we've convened various task forces, you know, scanning the environment, seeing what was happening, and finally decided, you know, we were going to try to make our own because nothing was coming down the pike exactly the way that we wanted to. So there's two projects that we are pursuing simultaneously here, and with the goal of should probably put my glasses on here, sorry guys, for 4 levels of community. So when we talk about community access tools, so there's the fact that they're an institutional repository, meaning that we're providing open access material to the community. So we want something that we can share and develop out the content that we have. The other fact is that both of these tools that we're pursuing in partnership are open source and they're community owned and developed. And then the third component of community is the fact that we're partnering with other consortia to bring these things forward. With Haiku, the partnership is with PALC, but we've also, you know, the whole Haiku community, which is part of the Samvera community, we're part of that realm of that in terms of development, so it's not all on our own. But the key, I think, fourth thing that I'm not seeing anywhere out there really is the fact that we want to partner to actually use these tools. So we're going to have staff sharing their expertise to actually run these tools. So things from you know, data mapping, inputting data, testing user experience, optimizing the web interface. That's work we're going to do together. So I won't say a whole lot about Island Door because I imagine everybody's pretty much familiar with them. Haiku is part of the Samvera community, if you're not familiar with that. Hyrax is another term. I promised I wasn't going to go into detail about it, one probably because I would get it wrong, but it's had some trajectory and development based on other communities. But the key aspect of Haiku is that it's architected to be multi-tenant. So it's meant to serve repository slices out to the communities with this, you know, within the same application. So you take advantage of decreasing costs by doing this together, yet you're still able to serve the individual needs of the institution. So if you're not familiar with multi-tenancy, that's kind of the holy grail for everything that Powney is looking for, is how can we work together to meet individual needs, but do it in a way that contains costs. The other thing that we wanted in this environment was something that was sustainable. So clearly we wanted a controllable cost structure. We didn't want to be licensing with vendors where their development or their business plan was something we had little control over. So that element of what we put in, what we use it for is within our control. As we're looking at the next 10 years in the Midwest, you're looking at declining budgets. So everything that we're doing is focused around cost containment, both in terms of the number of staff who have to run these tools, but we also want something that's viable, competitive, that really actually has a place in the scholarly communication realm. So PALC actually is the one, PALC starts everything. I'm pretty convinced on that one there. But and you'll see a trend today, I think, in the panels here. But they participated in DuraSpace's pilot, the Haiku Direct pilot, if you're familiar with that, in 2017. And they shared experience with Powney, but also with the whole iCult consortia community. And so together with PALC, Powney is partnering to work with another developer, Notch 8, which is out in California, to develop this out more specifically. And then as we're participating, which is really quite interesting for libraries. I hadn't done this before, but we're participating in that development community, which is also, you know, for those of you who are developers, you're probably like, yeah, whatever, but we were like both terrified and, you know, really interested in how this happened. But, you know, we're really very welcomed and very encouraged to build out community there. So we've also got the British Library group that is working with another developer. So we're building out that community in the haiku space. And then the most recent thing is we're working with the Washington Research Library Consortium, who already runs Islandora as much as a multi-tenant avenue that they can. It's something that's production ready. Washington has already, I think, really optimized that environment for serving individual institutions collectively. This avenue, you know, Washington's already got it in play. They know what they're doing. And so us coming on board there is a huge lead than what our individual consortia could do separately. So it's a mature product. However, it's not architected, focused on deep collaboration and multi-tenancy. So are we good? So our goal there is to work together to be able to make that happen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sebastian. I'm a co-founder of Index Data. We are a small software development company that I started in Copenhagen about 25 years ago or so. I've worked in library technology for about 30 years. We do lots of different things, provide services to libraries and vendors and consortia, but mostly we really like collaborations of all different kinds with vendors, with different combinations of libraries and so on, and it's become a little bit of our thing, I suppose. Project ReShare began as informal conversations between myself and various constellations of people at conferences about a year ago. I think the conversation started around the notion that there was an opportunity to advance the state of art of resource sharing in libraries in terms of reducing friction and costs, especially at the boundaries between different consortia and different groups. There was an opportunity to put the user and the user's experience in a resource sharing context more in the center of things. And there was an opportunity to put ourselves on a roadmap that would direct us towards being able to support things like collaborative collection management, digital lending, and things like that. The group that sort of gathered around these conversations eventually came to involve PALSI, Big 10 Academic Alliance, IBIS Plus, TRLN, and Gwilla, as well as the OLA Library Group and the Mozilla Foundation. And I think it was PALSI that eventually stepped up and pushed our group in the direction of more structure and tried to encourage us to become more action-oriented. And we formed a steering committee and began to meet face-to-face. And just a couple of days ago, we made our first official announcement that we were actually doing stuff. PALSI has set aside a initial contribution to the project of $100,000, and Index Data, in collaboration with a company in the UK called Knowledge Integration, are beginning development of the software. ReShare is an independent open source initiative, but from my perspective, it borrows a lot from the work that I've been involved in over the past 3 years with the Folio project, both in terms of the model that Folio developed over those 3 years for community ownership and open governance, but also specifically looking to reuse parts of the Folio app-based and modular architecture. So we think about, we want to approach resource sharing from a component-based perspective. So we have a set of reusable apps that can be combined to make a solution that will adapt itself better to different constellations, different types of consortia in different places, libraries working together independently, and so on. So that is Project ReShare. We have an ambition to have a minimally viable product. We have named that release Inevitable Narwhal, just because we felt that, maybe we felt that we owed the community something, because ReShare itself is not that imaginative of a name. So we're determined to have software release names that are I don't know. Jill here is the chair of our steering committee, and we're in the process of spinning up a product management group to lead our requirements capture, and we will be spinning up groups of subject matter experts to work similar to what we have tried to do in Folio, to have groups of subject matter experts working together with UX experts to put the staff experience, to put staff workflows in the center of the project, to again look for opportunities to make flows more easy, more flexible, more efficient. And that is Project ReShare. Jill or myself are great resources if you want to learn more about it.
You didn't even get the hook.
I'll take it back later.
Okay, so Jill, let's start with you. What is your community, the CC Plus community, hoping to gain through agency?
So I think we're looking for new ways of working with partners. And the right partners as well. We've, done the traditional library partnership type thing where we pay for a service. And to some extent that works, but there are certain times when I think we want to take a different approach where we are coming in with an idea that we want to be the, we want to set the tone for the project, or to be able to make sure that we're achieving the outcomes that we're working toward. I think in the case of CC Plus, where it's a group of consortia who are coming together, partnering with a developer, partnering with other organizations that are interested in creating this community, we want to we want to take responsibility for bringing all of this together. And I think it's just really critical for libraries in general today to do this. I think we love to complain when we don't get what we want, but are we really able to complain when we haven't taken full responsibility for, the decisions that we make in terms of the technologies that we choose and who we select as partners? Libraries have an opportunity here, I think, and there are lots of great new models out there that help us know how to work together and not just come to the table as a customer, come as an equal. So I think that that's something really exciting. I think that's something we're hoping to put together with the CC Plus community in terms of creating something that we can all rally behind, sort of flipping the ecosystem on its head and really retaking that conversation so that, we're the ones who care about the outcomes, right? I mean, and not that commercial providers don't. They care about an outcome too, but where can we find those agreements and be able to work together, and how do we choose the right partners in that?
You make a Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah. I was thinking the coffee was a bad idea. So, I mean, I talked a little bit about that cost paradigm there, but there is that element of the vision of how we want to work together through deep collaboration. If you go to our penley.edu website, we've got some vision statements for various product and service areas about how they might work in a collaborative environment where you want to staff share, team share across multiple institutions. And we put those out, and we've talked to a few vendors of existing products, but they've not gone anywhere with it. That's not a business model that appeals to them. In our case, the driver for this is to reduce costs all the way around. So, the system itself, but the use of that system going forward, and not an automatic 5% increase per year and blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is what can we do to produce something that's going to cost us less 3 or 4 years down the road. And so there just wasn't anything out there, and there weren't any takers. So that element of us, seeing our vision actually come to fruition meant we had to jump in and make it happen.
I think for me, it's coming from a vendor side, and as somebody who has done consulting for other vendors, who has owned products myself and worked with libraries looking to purchase products or being frustrated by products, I come at the same perspective as Jill, but from the opposite side. And for me, I think of it as an exercise in taking a product management model and putting it out into a community. So often when you develop a product as a commercial entity, you go to great lengths to try to represent the interests of your community within your organization. You create personae, you try to model their needs, you try to imagine what they want, you set up focus groups, you have users groups. And what I see this kind of collaboration doing is taking that the next step further and putting the owners, the responsibility of product management in the middle of a group of consumers of the software and developers of the software. And to me, at least, it's a really powerful approach. And then the second part, there's a visceral aspect of it that it's just immensely satisfying. For everybody working in these kinds of projects, it's been my experience that it's just a joy to participate, to feel direct exposure to the people that will consume software. For developers, it's immensely satisfying. And a lot of us do this stuff not to get rich or to make a lot of money, but because it's satisfying and because it feels important.
But also terrifying.
Absolutely. But that's part of the fun.
That is part of the fun.
So, and our next question is, how do you define community ownership, and what does it look like?
So I think partly what Sebastian just said, where you're coming to the table to have a stake in what it is that gets produced. I think in terms of CC+, the usage data project that consortia are working on is the community looks like consortia from all over the world. And how do we come together and share the work and take responsibility for that in sort of a systematic way, given that we all are doing some aspects of this work in our own boundaries? How do we start to cross those boundaries and form a meaningful community? And this has been something that's been a theme of all of these projects, I think, is this idea of how, within consortia, there's this mandate to collaborate in some way. But outside of your own consortium, it's difficult because a lot of times there's not the infrastructure there in place that allows you to make that leap and say, I'm going to partner with you, and I'm going to partner with you, and we have different funding structures and that sort of thing. So in this case, it looks like, I think, community ownership looks like a community of diverse organizations coming together and really working together towards the same goal, whether that's the developer involved, the folks who might eventually be a service provider, or if it's the consortium leaders. We want to make sure that that vision is shared. And so I think in terms of community ownership, at least within CC+, we're very much interested in crossing those boundaries and setting examples for other projects that might come down the line. Along with all of the other things, advocacy and types of things that we can do together when that infrastructure is in place.
I mean, there's two things for us, I think. As we're innovating in how libraries operate and innovating what libraries are doing, can the tools keep pace for that? And what we're finding is they can't really. And so there's that element of community-owned is a little more of an organic and more nimble approach to things. The container isn't drawn as tightly, so needs are met probably more effectively. There's an element of herding cats and that kind of element of it, but I think it is, the containers can be smaller in terms of how you want to advance things. And here, remember, we're talking about a consortia that's 43,000 FTE total, and yet we're going to make a global impact on that. So there's that element that everybody can contribute in some way to this. So that organic aspect of it, but I think it's also, it's taking it out of the business model only view. You know what I mean? That this is not about competition. It's not about containing secrets. It's about building on what's there, and you can make the product what you need the product to be versus putting in enhancement requests and waiting 5 years before anything actually happens, and even then it doesn't necessarily meet your needs.
I think there are three ingredients that I've observed as being important in this. And the first one is to have a strong shared vision or strong narrative about what you're trying to do. to bind together the community to help you overcome the cat herding challenges and the friction. And the other thing, the second thing I think is important is to be clear about governance. When you have different kinds of organizations at the table that are used to playing different roles, establishing ground rules in terms of how you work together, how you resolve differences is really critical. And it helps new people come to the table and feel like, if I make an investment, if I come to this table, what are my rights? And the last one has to do with transparency of process. So having the development process be something that's visible in the community, that's not hidden behind the walls, sits in the basement of some vendor or some one participant in the projects. And as an aspect of that, one piece that I feel that we got right in Folio, perhaps more than anything else, was trying to find ways to extend community ownership, not just to the organizations involved, but to different types of people. So putting a UX process in the center of a software design flow, where individual functional experts, the people that will actually be using the software day to day, gets to have direct influence on how it works from a usability and interface perspective, is just really powerful. And for me, has resulted in the Folio project, at least, in having a group of functional experts and users that feel much more empowered than they would be if they were just writing down specs, which end up looking much like a contract. Puts you back into sort of the same us versus them mode of collaboration.
All right, so at this point, I'd like to invite audience questions. Does anyone have one ready to ask? Okay, while you're thinking of that, I will ask, sort of, we started to get at it there a little bit with the cat herding, but what is the biggest challenge to cultivating your community? Oh, sorry.
Oh, wait.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt your question.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, there's a sort of a balance between sort of inclusiveness and engagement and governance. I'm sorry, I'm Catherine Mitchell from the California Digital Library. And so I'm curious to know, at what point in these projects does it make sense to bring in the governance? How far into it do you want to be before you start that? Does it curb the impulse to collaborate if you do it too quickly? If you don't do it quickly enough, do people get alienated? How does that work?
That's a really great question. We don't even have an MOU yet. I think it varies depending on the projects and how many partners you have involved. We're struggling with this in every project that I'm involved with. And I think that the main takeaway I've had is that build something lightweight enough that you can agree on it and then change it later if you need to. I think, at least in terms of ReShare, we've been struggling with that because there are how many of you are involved in a consortium? Okay, so consortial leaders, and you all know this because you have consortial leaders, they're very opinionated. We all have our way of doing things, and
I do not know what you're talking about.
and we all think we're right. And there's a lot of great energy that happens there because of that, but it's also a struggle to make sure you're incorporating everybody's ideas and that nobody's getting shut down. So those processes do need to be in place, and they need to be transparent. So I don't know if you want to add to that.
It was interesting. I mean, in the Folio project, which in terms of sheer scale and the amount of investment that was made is probably as big or bigger than any open source project in libraries. We waited a long time before we really nailed down a governance model. And at the time, it was because we didn't know what it had to look like. We were afraid of creating a bureaucracy that would hamper us, so we took what we thought of as an agile approach. But in retrospect, I think we would have done well to establish ground rules much earlier. In ReShare, we kind of took the opposite approach in some way because we knew that we wanted to lean on the OLF and the Open Library Foundation model that had been established by Folio. So we kind of brought in a bunch of things very early. And we all said, no, this is way too much. This is too complicated. I can't deal with this. And then we sort of gradually introduced it again as we started to realize that those things are necessary. But I think sooner rather than later, but to keep it light at first is a good way to proceed.
Yeah, I think it has to balance to the ROI for the project, you know what I mean, and what are the inputs for the project. So there's realms, like in our project, what we've initially done for the Haiku project is that Palney is funding the first round of development work, and then Palsy is going to fund the next round of development work. It's just 2 consortia, although it's, how many we're talking about? Almost 100 libraries, I think, between the 2 of us. And so how we develop our teams outward to get the specifications. But in our case, Palney, we've kind of moved towards this. You have a vision statement, which kind of, you have a vision plan that kind of leads what you're trying to achieve. And so having to be individually at every table is not desirable. You know what I mean? It's that element of I have way too much to do as it is. You know what I mean? And so just making sure what's getting achieved and they have an ability to get done what they wanted to get done is the key component of it. But I totally agree that, actually kind of some agility in your organizational structures, in different phases of the project, but having the clarity in the terms of the goals and the vision that you want to do. And again, what are the contributions getting you, and what are the expectations around contributions that are needed to move the project forward?
Okay, other questions? I'll do an impromptu one. So especially thinking of Folio, but in your other experience working in these, what is really the most important thing you've learned as part of that process? So one of those things was government. So was there another thing that sticks out for you, Sebastian?
I think if I were to think about, and this goes back to the last question too, I think it begins and ends with trust and the shared narrative. And I think in ReShare as well, before we began to talk about governance, the face-to-face meetings, getting people in a room and thinking about what our hopes and ambitions and our fears were, and realizing how much alignment we had around these things, build a lot of personal trust. There's a lot of these projects that ultimately comes down to human relationships. You can run a virtual project, you can run a project that spans the globe, but getting people face to face and building trust and being very transparent about what you do would probably be the biggest lesson, and where sometimes you fall down.
I just want to completely echo that. Even what we're doing in deep collaboration within the 24 libraries, time is always difficult, travel is always difficult, but you have to have that continual face-to-face time, at least on a yearly basis to build that up, and just ditto basically there.
I think the other thing that I've learned through these projects is that consortia are such a natural place for this type of work to happen, because that trust already exists within their communities, hopefully. And so building that trust then, I think consortial leaders get together. We have those face-to-face meetings. We were, one of the things I said to Kirsten at dinner last night was like, it is easier because I trust you completely. I know that I can turn over anything, and that she's not going to, steer it in a direction that I wasn't anticipating, and having that trust built up is key. So, yeah.
So how about the challenge? Yeah. Biggest challenge other than sort of bringing people together in the same direction, pushing beyond that.
I think there's 2 for me. The first one is I think these collaborations, these deep collaborations, are in many cases anchored around using open source as a vehicle to drive collaboration and to get people around the table. And I've got really deep and powerful belief in the ability of open source collaborations to break down boundaries. You fight against preconceived notions about what open source means in terms of, does that mean I need developers to run the software? What does it mean? Is it about free beer? Is it about free kittens? You get steered in to these sort of weird corners when you talk about open source software, whereas for me, it really is primarily about the collaboration and the conversation that you get to have when you agree to put the intellectual property on the table in a shared space. The other one, which is really challenging too, especially when you collaborate across types of organizations, is that there's a tendency for people to snap into existing roles and existing expectations. It's very easy for me as the developer to snap into a vendor perspective, or for me to be perceived in a vendor role. And in Folio, which includes so many different types of organizations, from huge commercial companies to little ones, to libraries, to consortia. You know, we constantly have to fight against snapping into these existing patterns of behavior because they are so old and so established in terms of how we view each other and what we expect from each other. So you have to really be pushing against that all the time.
I think in our case, the biggest challenge is time. I mean, it's time and expertise. And I think there's another question that's talking about what can you do, but there is that element of, building kind of project management expertise, but also kind of understanding the business model approach to this, being more efficient in terms of translating our vision to what we want this product to actually operate, and I think also just breaking past patterns, not replicating current products, but really be thinking the vision out about what our information service is going to look like 5-10 years from now, and designing for that rather than just replicating what you had before cheaper. But the time and the focus for the people when we've got, in our schools, our librarians are being captured for other work on the campus, so it's not even just a shrinking number of staff people, but it's the fact that they're trying to do many different things. So how can we, and again, that's a part of our deep collaboration mode, is how can we build that expertise to try to translate the service goal that we have for our constituents into what this product design ought to look like, and doing it in a way that's useful for working with the development community.
I don't think I can add anything to either of those two. I think that hits it. I guess maybe the only thing that I would just say is helping the rest of the community, so the people who are not maybe physically at that table also feel a part of what's going on, because the community extends beyond just the people who are sitting around the table, especially for our consortia, it's our libraries, and we want to make sure that they have an active role in these projects and are supportive of what's going on too, and we want to give them a way to channel their energy towards it. So that kind of gets back to the governance question, I suppose, but how do you set it up in a way that the community can really take part and feel like this is something they want to be a part of?
And I think that gets to the last question to some extent. What can individual libraries or audience members do? I would suggest that finding something that you're interested in, if you're excited in this approach, find something you're interested in, go to your local consortia and find out if there's anything going on. Find one thing that's happening and sort of grow that community and giving feedback. But what other thoughts do you all have?
So I know that's absolutely true. Alan Jones at the New School proposed at least 2 of these projects. So the ideas are coming from our members, and that one is absolutely true. And then find a partner like Sebastian, not Sebastian because I need him for a couple of things, but find partners. We need to find more partners like Sebastian, because he has been driving so much of the modeling that I think is so valuable for libraries, changing our mindset, changing my mindset for sure. I'm a true believer in all of this stuff that's been said today, but I think this is where libraries need to be. We need to be taking the role of agency really seriously, and not just as a consumer of products and information, but who do we care about? We care about our patrons. How do we get the information to them? We need to take responsibility for that. So I would just encourage you to work with your community, work with your consortial leaders, and try to make something happen.
So I would, all of that is true, not necessarily stuff about me, but I would encourage other commercial entities to try this out. I think that there are ways to experiment with this approach without necessarily making a turnaround, but look for opportunities to engage with communities in this way in specific areas. If there's an idea about a product where there's an opportunity to build up a community around that product as you build it, think about trying it. One of the things that has been interesting for me about the conversation in ReShare was that we talked about the business models. We tried to, in Folio, Folio was very driven by specific needs and a desire from EBSCO and EBSCO's support and Olay's support. So a lot of us were kind of pulled along in their kind of, in the eddies, in the wake in a sense. But with ReShare, we had to get down back to basics and say, well, how do we make this work? How does this work for commercial companies? How does a commercial company defend an investment in something that becomes everybody's property? How does that investment work? And we talked about that, and we talked about models for aligning around an understanding of the costs and how we could share the responsibility as different types of entities to try to recoup some of that cost, to offset that cost, and even to help the commercial companies that participate in establishing business models. So we talked about the potential for non-commercial partners signing provisional service agreements with commercial partners so that they'd have a model going into a project that there'd be a revenue stream down the road. And trying to think creatively about how you make this kind of model work, because it's so obviously, it's powerful and it feels right for the moment in terms of enabling greater flexibility, more responsiveness of technology to the needs of the community.
All right, thank you. I think with that, we are at time. Thank you.